broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Michelle Schurig and Erin Massengale. Can you hear us, Michael?
I can hear you clear.
Yay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our AHG Greater Bay Area monthly chapter meeting. And today we are doing a presentation on nourishing the lungs after the California wildfires.
Everything's great. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you want us to go ahead and start, Michael?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Good morning, everyone.
Right. Hi, everybody.
Aloha from Hawaii.
Great. All right, so here we go, like this. So my name is Erin Massengale. I am an East-West graduate, and I have a small practice in Walnut Creek, California. I primarily treat women with energy issues and menstruation issues, but with the California wildfires that came up just 2 short months ago, and being so close to the Napa area, this was something that really actually affected my family, where after the fire, during the week of the fires, we were actually in the home all day because the air quality was so poor. So Michelle and I decided to get together and do a talk on this.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Michelle Schurig. I'm also a graduate of the East-West School of Planetary Herbs, and we are both members of the East-West Free Clinic in the Greater Bay Area and the Greater Bay Area chapter. I have a small practice that's very part-time. I work full-time in criminal justice in juvenile probation. My background's in public health. So I'm really excited. This, as Erin said, lung herbs are not something that I use a lot of, but we found that this presentation was really timely given the aftermath of California wildfires. I'm in San Francisco, California, and literally the night of the fires, there were such strong winds, I could smell the smoke from my apartment in San Francisco. So I think it'll be hopefully an interesting topic today to go through. Welcome. We're going to get started. Yeah.
So today we're going to go over a little bit of the background. We're going to talk about some environmental factors and things that you can do when you're faced with smoke inhalation. We're going to talk about Ayurvedic and Western viewpoints and herbs, Western herbal formulas, traditional Chinese medicine viewpoints, and Chinese herbs and formulas. And then we'll finish up with some questions and answers at the end. And if Michael, of course, has anything to add at the end, we would love to hear what that is. So a little bit about the background. Michelle, did you want to go over that? Okay. Basically, more than 14,000 homes and 4,000 commercial buildings were destroyed in the recent wildfires. Many of the people affected were close personal friends of mine. And Sonoma County summoned it as the worst damage. Parts of Santa Rosa basically reduced to rubble. We had at least 42 casualties as a result of it. And the air quality in San Jose, San Francisco, Napa, and the surrounding areas had pollution as high as days in the pollution as high as in China.
Yeah, and just to say that their high-risk populations were most severely impacted, which includes people over 65 years of age, children, just because their lungs are still in development and they tend to breathe faster, and pregnant women, the developing fetus, and persons who are immune compromised, and those with respiratory and cardiovascular issues. Yeah, the air quality was really bad, and in Napa, one day it was at 404, which is just off the charts for particulate matter in the air. Is it going down? Okay. So our lungs are basically the first and most obvious organs affected by pollution. And the pollution negatively affects our alveoli, which are the tiny sacs that facilitate the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. And the compounds in the pollution can also react with enzymes to transform into metabolites that cause neurobehavioral disorders, tissue damage, and cancer. So there's some ways that we can obviously just reduce our environmental exposure, which I think is like one of the top things to do. I mean, herbs and food therapy and all that stuff is going to be great to help, but really the best way is to just minimize your access to the outdoors. So closing all the windows and doors tightly, recirculating air conditioning, using air filters. You probably heard of the N95 masks. They were all totally sold out in San Francisco around the time because everybody was grabbing them, but they can filter out about 95% of the smoke particles if they're properly fitted. And you would want to drink plenty of water just because this particulate matter, when it gets into your lungs, the stuff that can't fit in your lungs will go into your bloodstream. So it's just really good to keep replenishing with water and keep things clean, detoxifying. Keeping houseplants in your home as natural purifiers, such as spider or snake plants, can be great as well.
So in my practice, I use food. I need a lot of food therapy because I really feel like it's really important for our clients to have a really strong foundation. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some food therapy that we can do and how I looked at this from the viewpoint of Ayurveda when we were going through this. So we had a lot of hot and dry air coming through our valley, and air being vata and it being hot equaling pitta. I was looking at doing things that were going to balance wind and balance heat. So that means that we're going to avoid light foods and we're going to avoid hot foods. And I think that slide is wrong. But so we're going to want to have heavier foods that are moist to counterbalance the hot, dry air. And the four tastes that balance vata are sweet, sour, and salty. So coming from the idea that we want to use nourishing foods that are easily digestible, we should have smaller and frequent meals using spices like turmeric and rosemary. Turmeric is one of the best anti-inflammatories, and being that we're breathing in air that's going to aggravate our lungs and cause inflammation, it's good to just start with basic food things. Eating sweet fruits is really helpful. Making sure that we're having cooked vegetables, foods such as oatmeal, using natural sweeteners such as honey. Pears are really good in moistening, especially particularly right now that we're in autumn. And we're also going to want to avoid dry foods such as rice cakes. We want to eat mild or bland foods and stay away from hot spices such as cayenne. And eat foods that are high in flavonoids, foods that are going to help detoxify our lungs, and foods that are going to help moisten our lungs. So eating foods such as asparagus, spinach, garlic, avocado, squash, zucchini, potatoes, melons, grapefruit, strawberries, and peaches will help detoxify your lungs, liver, and brain. And the other thing, this is kind of one of those fads, but is certainly a fad for a reason, is really bulking up on bone broth because it's high in protein and it's highly nourishing and easily digestible. Eating foods that are high in flavonoids will inhibit the inflammatory process and pathways and support cell cycle regulation and repair. So fruits like berries, grapes, pomegranates, and this would also include green tea and artichokes. And green tea has an incredible antioxidant count and can actually tighten up inflamed tissues. Also, and I know that this isn't particular to lungs, but it certainly is particular to the situation that we were in, where people are out, people still have to live their life. They have to still go to work. And I got a lot of calls for people who are getting sinus headaches because they're breathing in the particulates. If they didn't get a mask, they're just kind of out in it every day. And so a good way to address the sinus congestion and runny noses is with an herbal steam. And I suggested using eucalyptus oil. And you can simply do the steam by boiling a hot pot of water and leaning over it with a towel or a large blanket draped over it. Of course, we're not, not with the fire on. And a few drops of eucalyptus oil can really help clear the sinuses so that we can get rid of those headaches from the sinus congestion. So I'm going to go over some herbs that that spoke to me. This isn't all of them, of course. There's, I think, a ton of lung herbs out there. We're just going to talk about a few of them. So when you're thinking about this, think about your favorite lung herbs. These were some that I was really interested in and found that were really relevant in the situations that I was in. So aster. Aster is sweet, so that we're addressing that sweet taste. It's bitter and it's aromatic. And it's slightly warm, but it's moistening in the oily scent. So this is a relaxing diaphoretic. It's an expectorant. Specific indications are lung deficiency, cough with cold signs, asthma with tension or a spasmodic and wheezing cough, and a cough indicated by the onset of flu with tension. But it can dramatically reduce chest tension. It dramatically reduces wheezing, shortness of breath in those with mild or moderate asthma, especially during exposure to wildfire smoke. And this often works both well symptomatically and long-term. Another really great Western herb is plantain leaf. The plantain leaf has been used for hundreds of years to ease cough and soothe irritated mucous membranes. And there's even clinical trials that have found it favorable against cough, cold, and lung irritation. The bonus is that it also helps relieve the dry cough by spawning mucus production for the lungs. And then we have mullein leaf. Mullein leaf, we use the flower, the leaf, and the root. It's an expectorant and a demulcent and an antispasmodic. And it's used for lung and bronchial congestion, spasmodic cough, and irritated throat. And what I really love about this is I think it's a really great poultice on the chest. So if you're having a lot of bronchial congestion, my family happens to be sick during the week of the fires. And so all of us had this really, really amazing cough, and any exposure outside actually made it quite worse. So the mullein poultice on the chest really helped calm the need for the tightening of the lungs. And a good mullein cough syrup would also work really well. And you can do this by making a cup of mullein tea and using about 1 pound of honey and mixing it and taking 1 teaspoon as needed. The next herb is elecampane. The Greeks and Romans and Chinese and even the Ayurvedic medicine have used elecampane for respiratory support. And since the 1800s, lozenges and cough drops have been produced from this very specific root because it has a relaxing effect and it smooths the tracheal muscles. There are 2 active compounds in this root that provide beneficial effect, and that's inulin, which moves the bronchial passages, and allantogliptone, which is an expectorant with an antitussive action. The next herb is chaparral. This is a plant that's native to the Southwest and has been appreciated by the Native Americans for lung detoxification and respiratory support. Chaparral has wonderful antioxidant properties that resist irritation and also fight a histamine response. It's also an herb that fights harmful organisms. So a harmful organism would be the many particulates of plastic and whatnot that were found in the smoke that week, because this wasn't just a wildfire. This was far more than a wildfire. This was burning down commercial buildings and homes. And so we're also burning the plastic and whatever toxic chemicals are within those structures. The benefits of this herb are actually mostly available in tincture extraction, but a tea can also support respiratory problems by encouraging an expectorant action to clear the airways of mucus. We also used a lot of lobelia that week. It contains an alkaloid known as lobeline, which thins mucus and breaks up congestion, but it also stimulates the adrenal glands to release epinephrine, which relaxes the airways. So this is what we used it for. My husband has asthma, so it relaxed his airways and allows him to have easier breathing. Of course, we use it in small doses because too much does tend to have a nauseating effect. But because it helps relax and smooth muscles, it also is useful for the cough and cold remedies and really should be a part of a respiratory support protocol. Slippery elm, this is a lung herb, and it's also a stomach herb because it's a nutritive. So it's demulcent and it's also expectorant. It's used to treat sore throats, cough, bleeding from lungs, dryness of the throat, and a lot of other lung problems. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Oh, no, but I mean, whenever I think of slippery elm, I think of the homework assignment where we took slippery elm and rolled and made pills.
Oh, I read about that.
Yeah, rolled them up and made pills.
Yeah. And so we're at slippery elm. Colt's foot. I love Colt's foot. I use this a lot in the winter, not so much anymore. We seem to have a stronger Wei Qi in my household, but we use the flower and the leaves. This is a great lung herb. It's an expectorant, it's a demulcent, and it's an anti-inflammatory. And it's traditionally used for coughs and irritating upper respiratory problems. Marshmallow, also a root, treats lungs, stomach, and kidney. It's also a nutritive like slippery elm. It's also a demulcent. So this is also used for the inflammation of the lungs. It's really soothing, but this is also one of those herbs that can get a little slimy as well. So it's not used, of course, as a main herb, but as more of an assistant in any particular formula. Yerba Santa is a great herb for lungs. We use the leaves. It also goes to the spleen meridian. It's an expectorant, and it's used for upper respiratory congestion. So it aids in dryness, and it counteracts both hot and cold phlegm. So this is a really versatile herb because we get to use it with two different energies. And then we also have the yerba mansa, which we use the roots and the leaves. It's for lungs and large intestine and the bladder. And it's used a lot in the Pacific Northwest. So it's an anti-inflammatory. It's associated with mucus congestion, used for chronic nasal mucus and mouth and throat inflammation. Where are we at? The next one is pulsary root. And this is for your bronchioles and your lungs. Of course, because it's a lung herb, it's also going to help with large intestine. It's a diaphoretic, it's an expectorant, and a carminative. So we use this for the lungs and bronchial congestion for colds and flus, but it's also useful in this setting of healing your herbs from smoke inhalation. It's used for, and it's also used for treating pains accompanying with breathing. I use turmeric, and I really like turmeric for lung when we're using the viewpoint of Ayurveda. So it's an anti-inflammatory, it's a colloid, and it's a carminative, but it also treats lungs, and it's a long-used respiratory herb. It reduces coughing, and used in boiled milk to relieve cough and sinus congestion. It also curbs inflammation, is good for mucous membrane damage. The antioxidant power with turmeric is really significant, and the curcumin reverses the effects of potent carcinogens, which in smoke inhalation from fire is particularly important. I have cordyceps on here. I really love the medicinal mushrooms, specifically this one. We use it before we get sick to help build lung qi, but it basically improves oxygen deficiency in the lungs and enhances respiratory function with inflammation with lung conditions. So it improves respiratory health, it increases our oxygen uptake, it boosts our heart health, it also detoxifies the body, and the benefits that it gives for the people who suffer from respiratory conditions such as asthma or chronic bronchitis are very high. So it increases your body's ability to prevent respiratory distress and weakness. It also increases the body's ability to get oxygen into the extremities. So organ systems as a whole run more efficiently. And do you have mulberry on the? I don't think I do. Okay, so I also have mulberry down here, mulberry leaf and bark, and I don't think it's on the slide here right now. But we consider the mulberry leaf and bark as separate herbs in Chinese medicine, but both are cool, both moisten the lungs. So it balances this hot and dry condition of smoke exposure. It also cools and clears the eyes. And so mulberry bark is colder in nature, and it works on a deeper level to calm wheezing from cough, and it also helps with individuals with asthma. And it can be brewed in a decoction. So a couple of formulas that I have. Like I said, I use a lot of food therapy in my practice, so I like going to Ayurvedic therapies. And one of the Ayurvedic therapies for a dry cough without mucus is eating 1 banana with honey and 2 pinches of pepper and eating that 3 times a day. It's quite tasty. Another Ayurvedic treatment for dry cough and throat irritation is a cup of boiled milk of your choice. If you can tolerate dairy, please use it, with a half a teaspoon of turmeric and a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, and to drink that at night. And then for that dry nose that we get, and also to keep the sinuses clean, we can use 3 to 5 drops of ghee or sesame oil and put that up in each nostril. I have a bronchial congestion tea formula. These herbs are effective at clearing up bronchial congestion and can be used as a formula together, or you can use it in a tincture, or even make a syrup out of this by adding honey. So we have 2 teaspoons of licorice root, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of echinacea, a teaspoon of elecampane. We have some ginger and 2 cups of boiling water. Now, we didn't, of course, go over all of the herbs in this particular formula, but again, most of you are herbalists. I'm sure most of you have a long list of lung herbs that are your go-to. And these echinacea and licorice and cinnamon also fit into that. Another good tea as a respiratory tonic, this is something, this is actually a rosemary glad star recipe. It's not necessarily used for acute respiratory conditions, but over the course of time, this will create good respiratory health. And so it's 4 teaspoons of fennel, 4 teaspoons of rose hips, 2 teaspoons of lemongrass, a teaspoon of calendula, a teaspoon of coltsfoot, a teaspoon of mullein. We have a red clover to get rid of heat, and 4 cups of boiling water. And you can drink this, 1 cup a day, and have a little bit left over for the next morning as you're boiling your next brew. And then a good cough and lung formula, we have a recipe of golden seal. We didn't go over that, but that's a cold and bitter herb, very good for infection, but also very good for just clearing heat. We have mullein leaves, which we went over. Osha, we didn't go over Osha, but that is a lung herb, one that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Also really good for cough and congestion. We have pulsary root, both yerba manta and yerba santa, and the 2 cups of boiling water. And this leads us into our TCM viewpoint.
Okay, great. Thank you, Erin. So we're going to look a little bit from a Chinese perspective of what we mean when we talk about sort of lung stuff. So lung patterns can represent pretty much either an excess or a deficiency, according to traditional Chinese medicine. The effects from air pollution are often described as toxic heat invading the interior. So it's considered, at least initially, an excess. And the pollution can create symptoms of dry throat, cough, shortness of breath, your nose might bleed, and dry skin. Also, since the pollution particles do not always stay in the lungs, they can be added to the bloodstream. That adds additional tax on our liver and kidneys, our digestive and urinary systems, because they have to work harder to remove those particulates from our system. And chronic exposure can eventually lead to cardiovascular damage, liver inflammation, and decreased kidney function. The lungs hate dryness, and the emotion that's associated with the lung is grief. And it's interesting that lung is associated with the element metal, and these fires happen in the fall. So the fact that the California wildfires hit us during the fall, when lung issues are most likely to manifest, kind of delivers a double whammy. And not only that, but given just the trauma from, so many people lost their homes, family members were killed as a result of the fires, many people, passed away or without their homes. So the grief and sadness is abundant, and that really is an emotion of the lung as well. So we're really getting hit in all angles here, being that it's fall time, and also that there's a lot of grief and sadness around this. Just quickly on the slide, so from a TCM viewpoint, the lung, it's the only internal organ with direct contact to our environment. It hates dryness and cold. It is the ruler of qi, and it's associated with the metal element in the fall. The emotion is grief and sadness, and it governs the voice. A lot of times when you hear a very weak or shallow voice, that can indicate a qi deficiency, which also kind of relates here with lung qi deficiency. And it also houses the corporal spirit. So yeah, so herbs that are calming for the spirit will be really important, especially for somebody who's undergone this. So I'm going to talk at first about some herbs that would address dry and inflammatory issues that are associated with toxic heat invading the interior. There are a lot of lung herbs, and I'm sure that many of you have your favorites. So I just pulled out some interesting ones here, but there are, probably many, many more that could be used. So the herbs on this slide are mainly utilized to moisten and soothe the lungs. So this would probably generally be in the early stages after exposure to really poor air quality or somebody who doesn't have a lot of dampness in their system. So it's really to address a lot of the dryness and inflammation that's associated with being exposed to toxic heat. So the first herb is lily bulb, this Bai, which is really useful for moistening the lungs. It stops cough, and especially cough from dry lungs or lung heat. And it also has the additional calm the spirit impact, which is really important here. I'm going to go through a few single herbs, but obviously there are quite a few of these herbs are included in formulas, so there are a few formulas as well. The other one that I'm sure everybody's familiar with here is licorice root. It's in a lot of formulas as a harmonizer, and it's really good for moistening the lungs and stopping cough for heat in the lungs. It clears heat and toxic fire, and it is also a qi enhancer, so it helps tonify the spleen. We have honeysuckle flower, and again, very cooling, and the formula that you might be most familiar with is yin chow. I know I always have yin chow on hand for external heat invasion, a lot of times for the start of a flu or cold, but it also could be used, in this case, could be used for wastage wind heat, dry heat, summer heat. It can also, it does get a little bit into transforming dampness, so it's not completely for just dryness only. The Mai Min Dong, this is really great for, I'm going to try to pronounce it, but I'm terrible at it, Ophiphagon tuber. It moistens the lungs, it stops cough, especially dry cough, and it clears heat and eliminates irritability that would be due to yin deficiency, especially when the symptoms are worse at night. It also has a dual effect of moistening the intestines, which is the lung and large intestine pair. It enriches the yin, and it clears heart fire. So it actually improves the contraction of the heart muscles, and it increases tolerance of lack of oxygen. The other great thing about it for the immune system, which is very important in terms of lung, you really want to be able to increase your immunity, is that this herb will increase the peripheral white blood cell count. Oh, whoops, let me go back one. So there's a formula, Mai Min Dong Tang, which is generally used for hoarseness, asthma. It benefits the stomach. It harmonizes the middle jiao, and it drives the qi downward. And this formula, it includes ginseng, the renshen, jujube fruit, which is also great for calming the spirit, Cadenopsis, non-glutinous rice, jiban jay, which is camellia, and licorice. So this would be a really beneficial formula. The next one is the Chinese cucumber, Tian Hua Sen, Trichosantes root. It clears and drains lung heat, it moistens lung dryness, and transforms phlegm. It can also be combined with the Ma Min Dong for chronic dry cough, yin deficiency, and lack of fluids, and it can also be combined with the lily bulb with the Bai He. You can add, another great thing to do is to add muli, which is the oyster shell, for mental disorientation due to lung and stomach yin deficiency. kind of an interesting side note, there's some indication that in the research that this helps reduce string breast tumors.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Then we have Tianmendong, which is asparagus tour. This asparagus tour, it clears the lung heat, it nourishes kidney yin, very moistening to the lungs and generating fluids. This Tianmendong, it's used to tonify the yin of the lung, and it really does have a big impact on moistening the lungs and building up deficient lung tissue. We have Jinren, which is apricot seed, which moistens the intestines, unblocks bowels. It stops coughs and calms wheezing due to hot or cold patterns, and it's especially for dry cough. So again, just to reiterate, these are mostly have a moistening and cooling effect, with a couple that may have some damp clearing, such as the yin chow san formula, but they're mostly moistening herbs for the lung. Jimu, this herb clears heat, drains fire. It again nourishes yin, and it really is for coughs that are due to lung heat. It generates fluids. The only contraindication here is to avoid this with somebody who has a lot of spleen qi deficiency. Oops, let me go back. So one more that I have on this list that is not up here is Massengale gypsum, which is just, it's a great herb for cooling. It's very cold. It's really the most important herb to, I think, clear internal heat. And in general, from a food therapy perspective, you would want to avoid hot and spicy, fried and greasy foods, and eat plenty of grains and proteins and vegetables and greens. If the digestion is good, so if the spleen is pretty strong, then some fruits and juices can be tolerated as well. But again, we want to avoid anything that causes dampness, especially because then we're going to be moving into some of the next set of herbs, which deals more with the chronic damp issues. And when people have that really productive cough, then the dampness is already, it's in the lungs, it's in the chest area. So we want to avoid tipping over to dampness by taking in too many raw foods. So again, it's more of a cooked food. Asparagus would be good. Mung beans would be great because they're very cooling. Black beans, and some milk, if tolerated, could be in the diet as well.
And one of the things that Michelle and I were talking about when we were going over this presentation was the transition between when there's smoke exposure at first, we're dealing with this kind of hot and dry air, this heat that's invading this air that's invading our lungs and our body, but our body is going to try to counteract that by creating mucus, which is when we start producing this dampness that Michelle is going to be transitioning into. So there's two different ways that this is going to affect us. It's going to affect us acutely in the short term with this dry heat, and then as the exposure continues, our body starts to produce mucus, and now we have to counteract dampness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sometimes if the person has a lot of dampness already in their system, they might just even just bypass the whole dry section. They might almost go quickly into a really damp, coughing, hacking kind of condition too. So yeah, that's a great thing to mention. But yeah, the production of mucus is really there to soothe the inflammation that the body is feeling.
Exactly. Our body is constantly trying to save its life.
Yeah. So yeah, so most of the herbs and the formulas that we just went through were focused on moistening and cooling the lungs. Although they do have some other benefits that a few I mentioned. However, sometimes an invasion of heat mixed with interior qi deficiency, such as spleen qi deficiency, leads to an accumulation of dampness. In addition, the body's reaction to moistening a dry and inflamed area is to increase mucus production. In that way, we often see phlegm and damp conditions aggravating the lung and chest area. Some of the healing lung herbs and formulas in traditional Chinese medicines seek to eliminate dampness. I would say there are quite a few of these because it is pretty common to see dampness, and our diets aren't always that great. So it probably will turn pretty quickly into damp. One of the, great preventatives and the things to stress during fire season or with bad air pollution is diet. Diet is so critical, and anything we can do to build our Wei Qi, our immunity, will help our body fight off these attacks from external heat invasion. So cold dampness invading the lungs can occur from external damp influence attacking the body, or from any external influence invading and mixing with pre-existing disharmony of deficient spleen qi or kidney qi. And this results in accumulating dampness, which can cause this mucus and phlegm that is blocking the lung function. So in this case, the dampness is accompanied by cold, and thus are cold signs. So we're going to talk a little bit about basically what you would see in a person with these kind of issues, and then just talk about one of the formulas. And I just want to say thanks to Leslie, because this is pulled from Planet Herbs article that she wrote, and so this is very easily accessible, and it may look a little familiar to some of you as well. So these are some of the conditions that would be associated with when you see somebody who has these lung issues with cold, damp conditions. They would have a chronic cough with profuse white sputum, wheezing or asthma with copious white sputum, chest and flank stuffiness, distension and soreness, difficulty in breathing, especially when lying down. So it could be especially worse at night when you're sleeping. White pasty complexion, shortness of breath, and the pulse would be slippery and weak, floating or fine, and the tongue would be thick with a greasy white coat. A formula that we could use for this is urchin tongue, which is citrus and camellia combination. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this one. There are quite a few other ones as well, but this is a very common one that can be used to reduce the dampness and warm things up. Can't see the top of this. Cool. I thought it was just in the slide. One second. A little technical. Okay, so I see what I'm doing. I confused myself because so these are Chinese herbs and formulas that will cool and eliminate damp. So this is for heat conditions with damp. So this, again, this is similar to the cold damp obstructing the lungs, but it has heat instead, and it can be caused by external damp or wind heat invasion attacking the body. And again, there's this either a pre-existing disharmony of spleen qi deficiency that's caused a lot of dampness in the body, or again, as we mentioned, if you've been exposed to a lot of heat and your body is producing mucus to cool things down, again, you can experience a lot of this dampness here. So some of the things that you would expect to see is a cough with profuse yellow or green sputum, which is foul smelling, shortness of breath, wheezing, or asthma with copious yellow or green sputum or phlegm, chest and flank stuffiness. Again, it's especially bad when the person is lying down. The pulse would be slippery, rapid or floating, and the tongue would be thick, greasy yellow coat. So really showing heat signs here. Some of the formulas that you could use for this would be ephedra and apricot seed combination. Also the urchin tongue is in here. You could add Sclerotia, gardenia, apricot seed, and platycotton. Do you have anything to add to this one? To the heat of damp? Any experience with ephedra? So Erin has some experience.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm like, no, I don't. So I do have some experience with ephedra. I did have access to a single of ephedra in the tincture form. And there was a period of time where we were in between insurances, and my husband has really bad asthma. And while he will take the herbs I give him, he only takes herbs when he is in an acute state of crisis. He responds very quickly to herbs. He's Native American, so his body has this kind of scavenger gene that responds very quickly to herbs. And then once they start working, he thinks that he doesn't need them anymore and he stops taking them. But we were in between insurance, and he had run low and out of his rescue inhaler because he's on, I think, Dulera and then a rescue inhaler. And during those 2 weeks, gosh, you know, if you could just hold on real tight so we don't have to buy that inhaler out of pocket, that'd be great. And the way we were able to get through those 2 weeks is by him having small doses of ephedra daily. So I think he had about, I think it was 2 droppers full once in the morning, and if he needed it, once in the evening, and that was able to get us through the 2 weeks without his rescue inhaler. And without also using a lot of it as well. So in very small doses, we found it to be very effective.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so just in terms of some of the food therapy, I know that Erin went into that quite a bit on the Ayurvedic side, but excuse me, I need some.
Do you need tea?
No, I need some herbs.
Do you need some herbs? Do you need some Chinese herbs for your
Having
lung?
lung issues. Yeah. So for this one, to cool and eliminate damp, again, you know, you would want to try to avoid really hot, greasy, spicy, fried foods, a lot of meat consumption, alcohol and tobacco. Anything that's inflammatory is going to be, you know, terrible for this condition. And I think this is the last slide. So when lung qi is deficient, there can be tiredness, weakness, cough, and sweating. And because your immune system is weak, you may be catching a lot of colds and flus because the qi can't adequately perform its protecting, dispersing, or descending functions. I think this is definitely something that we can see coming out of the fires, that you know, people have really been hit from all sides. Their livers, their kidneys, their lungs are being impacted in the long term from this effect, and there's a lot of grief as well. So we have to really guard and try to build up our Wei Qi through food therapy, regular meals. Astragalus fruit is great for that, especially now that we're going into winter season. People generally want to increase their immunity, so anything you can do to increase your immunity will be really helpful here. But you know, the downside of not doing that is you're going to have really low qi, and so basically a few of the formulas. This is what it would look like: shortness of breath, weak voice, bright white complexion, cough, watery phlegm with an exhausted appearance, low voice, and a lack of desire to talk. And a lot of you might realize that when you have a client come in, you know, they may just barely, like, they're talking in a whisper, or like you can barely hear them, they're barely audible. That can show that qi deficiency. Weak respiration, daytime sweat, a lowered resistance to colds and flus, so you're getting sick all the time, you can constantly like have the tissues out, very tired and fatigued. The pulse would be empty, and the tongue would be pale or normal colored. So 2 formulas, I mentioned the Wan Qi, which you could just add into any of the formulas that you're probably taking right now, especially going through the winter season. It's really great to build that up. So I think astragalus root is one of my favorite go-to for increasing qi. And then we also have the 4 major ingredients formula, again, also to increase qi. And I think that, oh, and I have one more mention here of another herb, and that is Schisandra fruit, Wu Wei Ji. And this is really good as well for spirit, calming the heart, but also to constrain the leakage of lung qi. So the Wu Wei Ji really protects the lungs from becoming more deficient. And it's been traditionally used for asthma and wheezing. And recent studies have shown that it, again, increases white blood cell counts and boosts immunity. So it's a really great herb to include in your formula, the Schizandra. So that comes to the end. I wanted to invite Michael Tira, who's our gracious host here, for using his webinar to do this today. Michael, is there anything that you'd like to add? We have a few minutes, and we could also take some questions. Michael, are you there? Is anybody there? I know he's calling in from Hawaii and had to get.
Hi, great job, you guys. Fantastic.
You.
And you even kept it to an hour. That's really an achievement. I can hardly ever do that. This presentation is so wonderful. It really goes to more than just wildfires and smoke in California. It's a broad presentation that can be applied to all respiratory conditions. And I think you did a great job. And I just wanted to mention a few points that I took notes as I was listening to your very engaging talk. I generally recommend teas to be pretty strong, and some of the teas, like by rosemary and so forth, we need to specify whether that's per cup or quart. In any case, the problem with sometimes those kinds of potpourri type of formulas is that they don't necessarily focus on a particular problem. They're just kind of a general thing because somebody generally thinks that they're good for the lungs. So that's just.
I completely agree.
That's just a point of consideration.
I completely agree.
The other thing is I learned about chaparral only recently at the last AHG meeting, talking to a Native American person, because chaparral for the longest time fell into disrepute, and I always thought it was one of the greatest blood purifiers known. And she corrected me in that chaparral is used in very small amount, and because it is one of the nastiest tasting things you've ever had. If you've ever had it in tea or tincture, you'll know what I'm talking about. And
yes.
She talked about putting one or two leaves in a cup of water, and I never considered that was even therapeutically useful. But she said that's what the Native American people do, and I think it's because besides the actual biochemistry that's affecting the lungs, there's also reflex action that's happening from flavors, so that when you're putting in a strong bitter flavor, you're stimulating the liver metabolism to occur. So you're actually stimulating the body's own innate detoxification processes rather than thinking of the herbs as being a major factor that's going into that whole process. I also learned a lot about red clover because red clover is classified as an alterative or blood purifier. It's the quintessential alterative. And the word alterative is a Western herbal term that is not always clearly defined, but red clover for the lungs is something that I saw once with a person who had chronic cough that happened as a result of a long-standing flu, and I gave him strong red clover. I mean, an ounce, and when you talk about red clover, an ounce is actually a pretty big handful of
it is
flowers.
It's a very light, very airy.
Yep. So I gave him that, and I think red clover being in the same family as astragalus and so forth, I think it has chi tonic properties as well as blood purifying properties, and somewhat demulcent for the lungs as well. So one of the big problems with red clover is that it gets labeled as being something that's high in estrogenic precursors, and I think that for that reason it's not being as widely used as it should be, but it makes a great herb for the lungs. And Michelle, you mentioned the corporeal spirit, and I always love to use these Chinese terms and try to think to myself and reason out what does it mean the lungs represents the corporeal spirit, the body spirit. And what I came up with is that it represents the connection between breath and the soul, and so it's the closest that the physical world can get to the idea of spirit is breath.
Yeah.
And another interesting insight that I came up with a while ago when I was equating the indications of the lungs in relationship to Chinese five elements. Lungs being why the metal element, and it was a real insight on my part to figure out that there was a connection between iron, oxygen, and the blood. In other words,
Oh, yeah.
iron is what carries the oxygen into the blood. So that's one of the I don't know if the Chinese even saw it that way, but it certainly exists that way. And I wanted to make a mention about ephedra. You know, it's banned in this country, and it's one of the great losses, I think, of to herbalists is to not have ephedra available. Chinese herbalists generally think that you cannot treat the lungs without ephedra, and I
agree.
And the Western over-the-counter drug that might be considered to be taken with other herbs, I hate to say this, is Sudafed. That's pseudoephedrine.
Wow.
And the one of the great go-to formulas that I use for asthma, which you might find useful for your husband, Erin, is Ma Xin Shigan Wan, which is ephedra and gypsum combination. You can buy that in pill form, and I've seen it work for about 85% of asthma patients control in their asthma symptoms. And another one for wheezing is Ping Chuan Wan, Pingchuan 1, specifically good for wheezing. And then I can't help not mentioning my own formulas, Old Indian cough syrup and Mullen lung complex, which are convenient because they're already pre-formulated for you.
Yep, and you can get them at every local health food store, and that wild Indian syrup has gotten me through many a cough. I just carry it around in my purse.
So I think I've said enough about this wonderful topic. You guys really did a great job, and it's being recorded, and I welcome more from you both, or individually if you're so inclined to do this. And I know it takes time to put these webinars together, and I really appreciate that you did it for us all. And so
thank you for the opportunity. So
I've been working on a webinar on kratom, which I'm going to be giving to the public on December 11th, and I'm thinking about giving it to you all just as a trial run before I do it publicly on December 11th. So I'll keep posted.
I'd love to do that.
Kratom, of course, is currently one of my most favorite herbs on the planet, and I think that it's important that people really come to a full appreciation of its potential. All right, without much ado, I want to say thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Erin and Michelle, for a brilliant presentation. It was really over the top, and I hope that we'll have more people who want to do a webinar for our Saturday classes, and you guys as well. So thank you and goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy have a great day. Thank you, everybody, and we'll if you're interested in the PowerPoint slides, we'll figure out a way to get them to you. Just, I don't know, email us, Jill, or me or Erin if you have our email addresses. I don't exactly know how we could do that, but if you're interested in the PowerPoint, we can send it out.
Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful Saturday and an amazing Veterans Day weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, aloha.
Aloha.